Gardens, Bringing Beauty and Comfort to Our Lives, Part 1 of 3. Continue watching to find out more.
Sieni, that's one of many ways you might be greeted if you are fortunate enough to spend time exploring the beautiful Republic of Albania. It means, "How are you?" in Albanian. I'm Elvina. The friendly Albanian people wish for you to enjoy good health and uplifting surroundings. Welcome to the first of our three-part show, Gardens, Bringing Beauty and Comfort to Our Lives. In today's show, we will look at the early history of gardening and introduce you to some of England's finest gardens. Then, we'll see how gardening can also be incorporated into the lives of city dwellers. In Part 2 and 3 of this show, we will examine traditional and modern gardens on the European continent. A garden is a planned space for the display, cultivation, and enjoyment of plants and other forms of nature. Gardens can incorporate both natural features and ones created by humans, but are defined by how the space is controlled or managed. This can be to produce food, for enjoyment, or a combination of both. If a landscape is not directly managed, it may become a forest, grassland, or other natural ecosystem. Gardens differ from farms by being smaller, with more focus on the pleasures of growing food than efficiency. Gardens around the world commonly include water features, such as ponds, lakes, streams, and fountains. Humanity has cultivated gardens since ancient times. In Genesis, the first book of the Holy Bible, God created Adam and Eve, the first humans, and allowed them to dwell in a paradise land called the Garden of Eden. God instructed them to take care of the garden and nourish themselves with the fruits and seeds from its plants. The legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, were described by writers of the day as a series of tiered gardens, containing a wide variety of trees, shrubs, and vines, resembling a large green mountain constructed of mud bricks. According to legend, the Hanging Gardens were built alongside a great palace by King Nebuchadnezzar II for his wife, Queen Amitiz, who was from Media, or present-day Iran, and missed the green hills and valleys of her homeland. We will look more at this famous garden in Part 2 of this series. Gardening was first recognized as an art form in Europe in the 16th century, when it became a symbol of the ideal republic, evoking images of the Garden of Eden. The English gardener and writer John Evelyn wrote in the 17th century that,
"There is not a more laborious life than is that of a good gardener's, but a labour full of tranquillity and satisfaction, natural and instructive, and such as, if any, contributes to piety and contemplation."
Supreme Master Ching Hai, a keen gardener herself, has praised the joy of gardening on many occasions, saying this in a gathering with our association members in France.
In your house, if you have land, even small garden, you cultivate something for yourself also. so that you don't always have to rely on the supermarket. Yeah, and in case something happens, you always have something to eat. Very simple to grow food. The food that can sustain you doesn't have to be expensive and difficult. When I was in Germany, I was married, yeah? We had a little garden. And my husband and myself, we planted tomatoes. Oh, it grew so many tomatoes. And some flowers for my Buddha altar. Oh, they grow and grow and grow. So many flowers, so many tomatoes. And they also grew like peppermints and some salad and some coriander. It's not much, of course, but it's so nice to eat your own food. It feels so nice.
Kind-hearted viewers, let's pause for a moment to hear a brief message. We'll return shortly. Please stay tuned to Supreme Master Television. Vegan, 'cause we want to be healthy and strong. Welcome back to the first episode of our show on Gardens of the World. Let's continue by exploring the historic gardens of England. The English landscape garden, which is sometimes just called the English Garden, emerged in the early 18th century. It was pioneered by William Kent and later spread across the European continent. It presents an idealized view of a natural or man-made landscape. Gently rolling lawns, lakes, and ponds are often set against a background of trees. Picturesque architecture, such as classical temples, bridges, cascades, and grottos that would often enhance the landscape and create the idyllic feel of a traditional English home in the countryside. The renowned landscape architect Lancelot Brown, who is often credited as England's greatest gardener, designed over 170 parks, many of which survive to this day. One such famous garden is at Hampton Court Palace near London, which was once home to His Majesty King Henry VIII. Visitors to London often explore the 60 acres of traditional gardens and can enjoy grapes from the world's largest grapevine, which was planted in 1769 and continues to produce fruit to this day. In 1757, Sir William Chambers, a writer and traveler based in London, made 3 trips to China and published the book Designs of Chinese Buildings, Furniture, Dresses, Machines, and Utensils, which had a chapter on gardens. Sir Chambers designed Europe's first Chinese garden at the Kew Gardens, which was formally founded in 1759 and adopted as a national botanical garden in 1840. Kew Garden is now a top London tourist attraction and London's largest World Heritage Site. The garden is also home to the world's largest collection of living plants, as well as the traditional English gardens, its herbarium, which is one of the largest in the world. It also houses a rainforest and gardens from 10 different climatic zones from around the Earth. It has over 8.5 million preserved plant and fungal species, and its library contains over 175,000 volumes. Kew Gardens is planning to study the benefits of biodiversity in the UK at its Wild Botanic Garden in Wakehurst. During the COVID-19 pandemic, visitor numbers to all attractions in the United Kingdom have fallen much less than previous years, with outdoor attractions favored over those of indoor. In fact, in 2020, Kew Gardens became one of the UK's most visited tourist attractions for the first time. Many traditional English landscape gardens feature a lake and a footbridge in order to walk across and enjoy the view. The Sackler Crossing Bridge, made of granite and bronze, was added to the Royal Botanical Gardens, Kew, in 2006. Another way for visitors to appreciate the Kew Gardens is from the Canopy Walkway, which is 200 meters long and 18 meters high, offering a view of the canopy of a woodland glade. The bridge is designed to safely rust, so its brown appearance helps it to blend into its wooded surroundings. Another famous historic botanic garden in the United Kingdom is the Cambridge University Botanic Garden. It was established between 1760 and 1763 and was moved to its current site with the establishment of new gardens in 1846. The gardens currently hold a collection of over 8,000 species of plants from around the world and are used for research by the prestigious university. Scientists at the newly built Sainsbury Laboratory at Cambridge University researched the self-organizing properties of plants, including their growth and development. In February 2020, thousands of people watched the garden's moonflower cactus, or known scientifically as Solanaceras whittii, bloom in what was possibly the first time in the United Kingdom. The cactus, which naturally grows high above the Amazonian rainforest, usually blooms at night for only an estimated 12 hours. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many of England's beautiful parks have been closed, and many employees have been working from home in lieu of their regular workplaces. For people with small or busy homes, it can be difficult to find a quiet place to work. And what better place than the back garden, with plants and other co-inhabitants to provide peace, harmony, and fresh air? London-based architectural firm Buono Prismontas has produced a standalone structure called My Room in the Garden, which is like a modern version of a garden shed, but is intended for work or relaxation instead of storage, which most garden sheds have traditionally been used for. The 2.5-meter-high room is made in London from birch plywood, and Buono Prismontas is now already receiving inquiries from around the world. In last week's show, we introduced the English landscape garden and some fabulous examples of beauty and peace, which has been enjoyed for centuries. In today's show, we will move across to continental Europe. We'll first look at early types of gardens in France and Italy, and then examine how the English landscape garden spread across Europe in the 18th century and still remains popular today. Finally, we'll look at the exciting rise of urban gardening in some of Europe's large, densely populated cities. Let's begin our journey in Italy. Prior to the Italian Renaissance, which occurred between the 14th and 17th centuries, most gardens were kept behind walls and used for growing fruits, vegetables, and medicinal herbs, while monasteries kept their own gardens for meditation and prayer. The Italian Renaissance garden emerged in the late 15th century at villas in the historic cities of Rome and Florence. Inspired by the classical ideals of beauty and order, these gardens were created for contemplation and for enjoying the pleasure of the sights, sounds, and smells of nature. Over time, Italian Renaissance gardens became larger and more symmetrical, and gardeners added statues, grottos, fountains, and other water features. One famous Italian Renaissance garden is the Villa d'Este in Tivoli, near Rome. The villa was commissioned in the 16th century by His Eminence Cardinal Ippolito II d'Este, the grandson of His Holiness Pope Alexander VI, and an advisor to the French King, His Majesty Francis I. After a long history of private ownership, it was acquired by the Italian government and has been gradually restored during the last century. The garden is now a museum and is recognized as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It is especially famous for its large profusion of fountains. In 1495, His Majesty King Charles VIII brought the Italian Renaissance garden style to France. These gardens were characterized by symmetrical plants in beds or pots, terraces, and also canals, fountains, and other waterworks. They also often featured grottos and statues of mythological figures. Compared with Italian Renaissance gardens, the French version demonstrated more control over nature. French Renaissance gardens were designed to illustrate the Renaissance ideals of proportion and to remind viewers of ancient Rome. Over time, the French Renaissance garden evolved into the Jardin à la Française, which means literally, garden in the French manner, and is often called the French formal garden in English. The French formal garden was built as a symbol of magnificence and glory. Some of the most grand and famous French formal gardens are at the Gardens of Versailles, which are attached to the Palace of Versailles, the principal royal residence of France from 1682 until 1789. The gardens, which include 200,000 trees, cover 800 hectares with more than 200,000 flowers planted annually. They also feature 50 fountains and over 5 kilometers of canals. The Latona Fountain, named after the Greek goddess Latona, the mother of the sun and moon gods, was first established in 1670 and enlarged in 1686. It was restored between 2013 and 2015, and now operates 3 times a week during high tourist seasons. The Gardens of Versailles normally receive over 6 million visitors a year, making them the second most visited monument in Greater Paris after the Louvre. The gardens, along with the palace, are also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The design and construction and the Gardens of Versailles was portrayed in the BBC's period drama, A Little Chaos, starred by British actress Kate Winslet, who was vegetarian. In the early 18th century, the English landscape garden found its way to France. where it developed into what became known as the French landscape garden and gradually became more popular than the French formal garden. Besides its English origins, it was also influenced by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, a Swiss-born French philosopher, writer, and composer who wrote passionately in support of equality among humanity and greatly contributed to enlightenment in Europe. In 1761, Rousseau published his novel Julie ou la Nouvelle Heloise, in which he described a perfect landscape where people could be true to themselves. The following year, he wrote, "Everything is good when it leaves the hand of the Creator," further explaining why he believed that gardens should model natural landscapes. As a veg advocate, Rousseau's belief in equality and reverence for life and nature was also greatly reflected in his choice of diet. He wrote the following in his book, Discourse on the Origin and Basis of Inequality Among Men.
Every animal of the higher species has ideas, since he has senses. He even combines his ideas up to a certain point, and man differs in this respect only in the more or less. Some philosophic writers have even advanced that there is more difference between this man and that man than between this man and that or non-human animal. It is not, therefore, intelligence so much as his quality of being a free agent which makes the difference.
One famous French landscape garden is Rousseau's namesake, Parc Jean-Jacques Rousseau, located in Amenoville in northern France. The park was created by Rousseau's last pupil, René de Girardin, in the 1760s with the help of 200 English gardeners. Rousseau spent the last 6 weeks of his life at the park and was buried on an island in the park in July 1778. His remains were ceremoniously relocated to the Pantheon in Paris in 1794. French and other European landscape gardens were also influenced by Chinese gardens. In 1743, Father Jean-Denis Atheret, a French Jesuit priest and painter in service to the Emperor of China, had this to say about the emperor's summer residence near Beijing.
A beautiful disorder reigns almost everywhere, an anti-symmetry. Everything works on this principle. It is a pastoral and natural countryside that one wants to represent, a solitude and not a well-ordered palace following all the rules of symmetry and proportions.
Designs of Chinese buildings, furniture, dresses, machines, and utensils. A book by the English writer and traveler Sir William Chambers was translated into French soon after its publication. It brought a Chinese influence to French landscape gardens, so they began to include pagodas, artificial hills, and promenades. We can see that gardens have a long history in the European continent, but how about in modern society? How can gardens contribute to a healthy environment and atmosphere for the millions of people who live in today's crowded cities? Urban gardens are a great way to make cities more sustainable and more pleasant places to live in, and they are rapidly increasing in popularity, especially in Western Europe. Guerrilla gardening is gaining popularity where unattended outdoor public spaces are cultivated clandestinely and turned to something green and beautiful. During the COVID-19 pandemic, many people have been working from home instead of their regular workplaces. For many people, especially ones with small homes, it can be difficult to find a quiet place to work, So what better place than the peace and quiet of a back garden with plants and other co-inhabitants to provide peace, harmony, and fresh air? Roof space, which has often been left unused, can be converted into green roofs, which produce food and offer people an opportunity to enjoy a more natural environment without needing to leave the city or even their own building. Green roofs also provide a habitat for wildlife, extra insulation for buildings, water absorption, and air purification. In central London, there are now 700 green roofs covering 17.5 hectares, and the trend looks sure to continue as more and more people discover the benefits that gardening offers to physical, mental, and spiritual health. For those where rooftop gardening is not possible, a mini-smart indoor garden from Click and Grow is an ideal alternative. Utilizing the cutting-edge nanotech growth medium, this portable garden can bring you surprising yield in any corner of your room. Today, we'll look at historical and modern forms of gardening in Germany, along with its neighboring countries of Austria and the Netherlands. The traditional German garden was heavily influenced by the English landscape garden, which, as we showed in our first episode, emerged in the early 18th century as a presentation of an idealized view of nature, with gently rolling lawns, lakes, bridges, and picturesque architecture such as classic temples and Gothic ruins. German gardens of this Baroque era, by comparison, were designed to portray the practical usefulness of nature's beauty, so they often included vegetable gardens and fruit trees. German gardens were designed to portray the ideals of German Romanticism, the prevailing intellectual movement among German-speaking countries in the 18th and 19th centuries, in which intellectuals strove to create a new synthesis of art, philosophy, and science. The German gardens of this era reflected the life and values of the nobles who created them, so they often included decorated statues and memorial stones of national importance. One famous German garden is Sanssouci Park, located in the historical city of Potsdam near Berlin. The park surrounds its namesake Sanssouci Palace, a beautiful villa which was built by His Majesty Frederick the Great, King of the German Kingdom of Prussia, from 1745 to 1747, as his summer palace. Sanssouci and its gardens became a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1990, and it's now visited by over 2 million people each year from all over the world. Soon after its establishment, Frederick the Great had extensive gardens established around his palace. These included over 3,000 fruit trees, comprising of oranges, melons, peaches, and bananas, as well as vegetable gardens and flower beds, all surrounded and protected by beautiful hedges. The gardens have been extensively added to over the years and now include a church of peace, a temple of friendship, a Chinese-style house, Roman baths, marble statues, and artistic ruins, which symbolize political progress along with the remains of a heroic past. Like most European gardens from this period, the parks also feature fountains which were originally powered by ingenious steam engine technology. Similar style gardens can also be found in Austria, a country that not only shares the German language with its larger neighbor, but a lot of its culture. Some of its most charming gardens can be found at the famous Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, Austria's capital city. Schönbrunn, meaning beautiful spring, was named after a well which supplied the palace with water. Schönbrunn has a long history dating back to the 16th century, while the beautiful palace we see today was built during the middle of the 18th century. Throughout the centuries since, Schönbrunn Palace has featured incredible gardens, including an orangery or a large greenhouse which grows oranges, which was erected around 1755. Another large greenhouse which opened in 1882, featuring plants from all around the world, and other botanical gardens. The palace and its beautiful gardens were established as a museum in 1955 and was listed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1996. We can see that gardens have a long history in Germany and its neighboring countries. But how is it incorporated into modern society? How can gardens contribute to a healthy living environment and atmosphere for the millions of people who live in busy, densely populated cities? Is there still room for gardening in this modern world? Bright viewers, we'll pause for a moment to hear a brief message. When we return, let's take a look at some ways that the resourceful citizens of Germany and the Netherlands find space for gardens in even their largest cities, and how they integrate gardening into their daily lives. Please stay tuned to Supreme Master Television. Vegan side effect: getting used to with being clear-headed. Welcome back to our show, Profiling Gardens, and how they bring beauty and comfort to our lives. If you say Garten, meaning garden, many Germans will probably immediately think of relaxing and cultivating their favorite vegetables at their own Schrebergarten. Schrebergartens, which are also called Kleingardens or garden colonies, are tiny plots of land usually located on the edges of cities, which people can rent for a small fee. Most Schrebergarten come with an attached hut or small house called a Parzell, which can be inhabited during weekends and holidays. There are over 1.5 million Schrebergartens in Germany. The concept of the Schrebergarten was the brainchild of Dr. Moritz Schreiber, a physician from the University of Leipzig, who specialized in the health of children and the consequences of rapid urbanization early in the Industrial Revolution. He was particularly concerned that children whose families moved to the cities for work would grow up physically and emotionally impacted if they didn't have an opportunity to play in the countryside. He insisted that playgrounds be built for them to enjoy a more natural environment. In 1864, 4 years after his death, the Schrebergarten organization was named in his honor, which organized fields for children to play in. To enhance the air quality and offer an opportunity to grow fresh food, vegetable plots were soon added to these playing fields. Over time, these playgrounds gradually changed into family garden plots, and they provided a much-needed source of healthy food for many families well into the 20th century. Since the 1950s, Schrebergartens have been used by urban dwellers primarily as an escape from the crowded cities, and they are becoming increasingly popular among young Germans as part of the positive shift away from consumerism and towards a greater environmental consciousness and desire to grow their own food. The demand for Kleingardens in Berlin is so high that there is now a waiting list of around 12,000 people, and it usually takes an estimated 3 to 5 years of waiting before an allotment becomes available. The popularity of the Schrebergarten has also spread to neighboring Austria and Switzerland. But what about densely populated cities that don't have the space for allotment gardens? Dutch architect Stefano Boeri in the city of Utrecht has a solution. His Wonderwood project consists of constructing a 90-meter-high vertical tower which will house 10,000 plants of 30 different species. It will also provide about 200 apartments to help solve the city's housing shortage. This variation of the vertical forest idea will produce about 41 tons of oxygen each year, which is close to 1 hectare of forest vegetation. The building will also have space for office areas, fitness and yoga, bicycle parking, and recreational spaces. The first floor will be called the Vertical Forest Hub and will be dedicated to the documentation and research of urban forestation worldwide. But greening cities don't always need available land or even new buildings. In the last episode of our show, we discussed how rooftops in London are being converted into green roofs, which provide food and a space to enjoy fresh air and nature. In Germany, the city of Stuttgart has been subsidizing rooftop gardens since 1986, and over 60% of the city's area is now covered in vegetation. This highly successful project has been shown to significantly improve the city's air quality. The capital, Berlin, is now following Stuttgart's lead in greening rooftops. As people around the world become more aware of the environmental costs of food production and transportation, there is an increasing demand for ethical, sustainably produced food. As well as being vegan, it's also good to eat food which is locally produced. But is this possible for urban dwellers? Can cities be sustainable? Dr. Rob Rogema, professor of spatial transformations at the Hans University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, says that it's possible for urban regions to provide 100% of their residents food, provided people are willing to change their diets and support the project.
Well, if everything goes well and everyone wants this really to happen, we can provide at a regional level a 100% coverage of food for everyone. I think that is possible. If you calculate the available space that is not used for anything else at the moment in Amsterdam, it is around 12.5% of the total area. And on this area, if you use that for urban agriculture production, we can feed 25% of the local population of Amsterdam. So if you take the city and then you take the area around it like 4 times the area, that is enough to grow all the food that you need.
Wow, These modern urban gardens are really making cities not only more beautiful and more sustainable, but they are also providing fresh, healthy, delicious vegan foods for thousands of fortunate city dwellers. Charming viewers, thank you for your company today during Gardens, Bringing Beauty and Comfort to Our Lives, Part 3 of 3. May faith and love accompany you on life's sacred journey. Vegan, 'cause we know it hurts if we are not.
Our programs offer many languages. Please visit suprememastertv.com/schedule and suprememastertv.com/AJAR.
Nos programmes offrent plusieurs langues. Veuillez visiter suprememastertv.com/schedule et suprememastertv.com/AJAR.
Nuestros programas ofrecen varios idiomas. Visiten suprememastertv.com/schedule y suprememastertv.com/AJAR.
Naše programy nabízejí více jazyků. Prosím navštivte suprememastertv.com/schedule a suprememastertv.com/AJAR.